picture this, right? It's a weekday morning, not that far in the future.
Yeah.
Your electric car, it just glides out of the driveway silently, charged up overnight, by your solar panels, soaking up all that clean energy from the grid,
Right.
which is this amazing mix of wind and nuclear and geothermal.
Yeah.
So efficient. Your energy bills are like practically non-existent.
It's wild to think about.
It is compared to like a few decades ago.
Right.
We were so reliant on dirty coal and
finite resources. Yeah, totally different picture.
It's a huge difference, right? Like this idea of abundance instead of that old scarcity mindset.
Totally. And it goes way beyond just energy. Think about food.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Imagine crisp apples, but they were grown indoors.
Indoors?
Yeah, in these vertical farms using LEDs for light.
Wow.
Tomatoes, bursting with flavor all year round.
No matter what.
Even eggplant, thriving, but right in the city.
It's amazing how technology is changing all this.
It is. And what if your breakfast included lab-grown meat?
Okay, now that's getting futuristic.
It is, but think about it. It frees up so much land.
All that land we use for livestock.
Exactly. And then there's healthcare.
Oh, don't even get me started. The possibilities are mind-blowing.
Imagine you need medication. It's synthesized in space.
In space.
Yeah, and delivered by a drone.
Right to your door.
We're talking star pills making rare treatments common.
That would be incredible.
And the air in our cities so much cleaner, quieter because of electric vehicles.
Wait, all those, what are they called? Those last mile delivery robots?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a whole different way of life. It's
a potential reality. That's what our sources suggest.
It's exciting, but I'm sure it's not all smooth sailing, right?
Of course not. There are roadblocks. It's not this automatic march towards abundance.
Yeah, what are some of the big challenges?
Well, for one, deeply held different beliefs about how we should get there.
Right, different visions.
And then there's the unintended consequences of past solutions.
Solutions becoming problems.
Exactly. You tried to solve one thing.
Yeah, to create another.
Yeah, environmental regulations.
Yeah.
Actually making it harder to build clean energy infrastructure.
Oh, I see what you mean.
And historically, we've often focused on boosting demand
instead of
addressing the supply issue.
The root of the problem.
Right. So it's complicated.
It sounds like we've got a lot to unpack here. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, our sources suggest that a foundation for all this abundance is rethinking how we live. So
housing, right.
Housing, exactly.
Okay, let's talk cities. I mean, they're kind of at the heart of it all, right?
Absolutely. And Ed Glazer, he has this really interesting way of describing cities.
How's that?
He says they're the absence of physical space between people and companies.
That's a good one. So it's all about proximity.
Exactly. And it's kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
Because we have all this technology
to connect us remotely.
But somehow this physical proximity, it's become even more valuable.
Yeah, more important than ever.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious. Why is that?
Well, think about it. These dense urban environments, they become these catalysts for innovation.
Ideas just bouncing around.
Exactly. Take generative AI companies.
Okay.
They've clustered along this small stretch of the California coast.
Silicon Valley, right.
Yeah. And even though their work is digital, they're all right there, close together.
Makes sense, right. Collaboration, people moving between companies.
It's this constant flow of talent and ideas.
Pushing the boundaries.
Yeah. Our source calls it breaching the frontier of ideas.
That's a great way to put it. It makes you wonder, though.
Yeah.
Why haven't other places with similar advantages become those kind of hubs?
It's a really good question, right? What is it about these specific locations?
It's fascinating. And this concentration of innovation, it has these ripple effects, right?
Totally. It impacts the whole fabric of society.
Yeah. Rod Shetty's research on upward mobility in the U.S., it's kind of alarming.
Yeah, what did he find?
Okay, so the chance of a child earning more than their parents, it's dropped dramatically. In 1940, it was a 92% chance.
Wow.
By the 1980s, it was down to 50%.
That's a huge drop.
And the source suggests that it's linked to access to those higher paying jobs.
Which are often in those expensive cities.
Exactly. So if you can't afford to live in those places, you're kind of stuck, right?
It becomes a barrier to opportunity for sure.
So then the question is, how did we get here? How did our cities and our housing policies, how did they evolve in a way that kind of created this situation?
Right. And our sources dive into that. William Fischel, he talks about like how trucks and buses changed everything.
Really?
Yeah, they changed like the whole spatial layout of cities.
How so?
Before trucks and buses, everything had to be close together, right?
Oh, I see. Like residential, industrial, commercial, all crammed in.
Exactly. But then with trucks and buses, suddenly
they could spread out.
Exactly. Different parts of the city didn't have to be like right next to each other anymore.
So that's how we got these separate zones, residential zones.
Yeah, but then it also created this need for homeowners to like protect their areas.
From like the noise and pollution of industry.
Exactly. They didn't want a factory popping up next door.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's where zoning comes in, right?
Zoning, yeah, it started with this basic idea of like separating incompatible uses.
Like you said, keeping the factories away from the houses.
Right. James Messenbaum, he called it good housekeeping.
I like that analogy.
It's pretty clear, right? But then over time, zoning kind of morphed
into
this tool for like limiting the overall supply of housing.
Really?
Yeah, and sometimes it was used to like explicitly exclude certain groups of people.
Oh, wow, like discriminatory zoning policies.
Exactly. And then you have like the Petaluma Plan in California.
That was a big one, right?
Yeah, put caps on the number of new housing units allowed.
And those urban growth boundaries.
Right. So it basically limited how much the city could grow.
And other cities followed suit, right?
They did. It became a model.
So what's been the impact of all of this, like all these zoning regulations?
Well, California's housing production, it's declined significantly since like 2007.
Compared to?
Like the 50s and 60s, they were building way more back then.
It's a huge difference.
It is. And this connects to like a really core tension that Jerusalem Demses talks about.
What's that?
Seeing homes as assets
versus
basic needs.
Okay, so like an investment versus a place to live.
Exactly. And she argues that the wealth-building potential of homeownership, it relies on scarcity.
So the less there is, the more valuable it becomes.
Exactly. So you have this inherent conflict between like
existing homeowners
and newcomers.
Because the existing homeowners, they benefit from limited supply.
They do. It drives up their property values.
But the newcomers, they're just trying to find an affordable place to live.
It's a tough situation.
It is. And then on top of all of this, we have to factor in like environmental regulations, right?
Right. And sometimes those regulations, they can have unintended consequences.
Like with housing.
Exactly. Like California's CEQA.
The California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah, it was passed with like really good intentions to protect the environment.
Right.
It's been interpreted so broadly that it could be used to block almost any development.
Really?
Yeah, our source even says it applies to anybody engaged commercially in putting two sticks of wood together.
So like even small projects can get caught up in this.
Yeah, and it's not just about the intent of the law, it's the process, too.
What do you mean?
Like the sheer volume of environmental impact statements required in California.
Compared to like the federal level?
Yeah, it's way more.
So projects just get bogged down in all this paperwork.
It can take years sometimes just to get through the process.
It's ironic, right? Laws meant to protect the environment end up delaying, maybe even preventing, the very things that could help us be more sustainable in the long run.
It's a real challenge, and it ties into this broader debate about degrowth.
Degrowth. I've heard that term. What is it exactly?
It's this philosophy that says to address climate change, we need to like scale back economic production.
So like consume less, produce less.
Exactly. Kind of the opposite of abundance in a way.
Right. So instead of trying to create more clean energy, we just use less energy overall.
That's the idea, but it's controversial.
Why is that?
Well, for one, it can disproportionately affect the poorest people.
Because they're the ones who are already using the least.
Exactly. And then there's the political side of things.
Oh, yeah. People don't always react well to being told to consume less.
Right. Like we've seen protests over energy prices in places like Sri Lanka and France.
Yeah, I remember hearing about those yellow vest protests in France. That was over fuel taxes, wasn't it?
Yeah. And even in Germany, there's been debate about like heat pumps.
So it's not as simple as just saying, let's consume less, is it?
No, it's politically very difficult. And our source suggests that a more effective approach might be to focus on creating abundance.
Okay, so like more clean energy, more efficient housing.
Exactly. Instead of just trying to do less, we find ways to do more, but do it sustainably.
I like that. So instead of focusing on scarcity, we focus on abundance.
That's the idea. And a big part of that is,
energy.
Energy, exactly.
Okay, so this whole idea of like electrifying everything, that's a key piece of this puzzle, right?
Yeah, we're talking about cars, homes, cooking, laundry.
Everything running on clean electricity.
It's seen as a major way to decarbonize our economy.
And some energy analysts like Kalush and Griffith, they've estimated that we're talking about replacing like 1 billion machines with electric alternatives.
That's a lot of machines.
It's a massive undertaking, to say the least.
It is, and then you have to think about like the supply side of things.
Producing all that clean energy.
Right, and Jesse Jenkins, he's done some really interesting work on this.
What did he find?
Well, he says that we essentially need to like build another electricity grid on top of the one we already have.
Wow, a whole new grid.
By 2050.
That's not that far away.
It's not. And this new grid, it has to be all clean energy, solar, wind.
And how much land would that even take?
A lot, potentially. Like hundreds of thousands of square kilometers.
That's a lot of solar panels and wind turbines.
It is. And then Rule and Saltzman, they have this really stark analogy.
What's that?
They say to meet our renewable energy goals, we need to bring 2 new large solar facilities online every week for the next 30 years.
Every week.
Every week for 30 years.
That is an insane pace of development.
It is, and it makes you wonder, are we even capable of moving that fast?
Yeah, like can we actually build things on that scale that quickly?
Right, and our source uses California's high-speed rail project as like a cautionary tale.
Oh, yeah, that's been in the works forever, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Voters approved it back in 2008.
And it's still not done.
Not even close. It's facing all these funding problems and just like a lack of political will.
It's a shame because high-speed rail, it has so much potential, right?
It does. And these delays, they cost money. Brian Kelly. He estimates that every year of delay adds another 2 to 5% to the cost.
So the longer it takes, the more expensive it gets.
Exactly. And it's not just about money. It's also about our ability to like get things done.
Right. Like, can we still build these big, ambitious projects?
Even Governor Newsom, he's talked about this,
What did he say?
He's like, what happened to the California that built like all those amazing things in the 50s and 60s?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's like we've lost our ability to like think big and build big.
And John Podesta, he calls this public sclerosis.
Public sclerosis? What's that?
It's the idea that like we've gotten so good at stopping things
through regulations and lawsuits and all that.
Exactly. That we've forgotten how to actually build things.
It's like we're paralyzed by our own processes.
And there's research to back this up. Goolsbee and Syverson, they looked at productivity in the U.S. construction sector. It's been declining.
So it's not just a feeling, it's actually happening.
Right, and it's not because of a lack of investment either.
Interesting. So what is it then?
Well, Mancor Olson, he had this theory in his book, The Rise and Decline of Nations.
What did he say?
He said that, like, affluent, stable societies, they tend to develop more and more organized interest groups.
Okay.
And each of these groups, they have the power to like veto or delay projects.
So more groups, more veto power, more delays.
Exactly. It leads to more negotiations, more regulations, and it just makes it harder to get anything done.
And he contrasted this with like countries like China, right?
Where they can build things much faster.
It's interesting because those organized groups, they're often important, right?
Absolutely. They represent different interests. They protect rights.
But when it comes to these large infrastructure projects,
with so many stakeholders,
it can become a real bottleneck.
It can. Like with the high-speed rail, every group has their say.
And the project just gets bogged down.
And more expensive.
So we have this need to build a lot of new infrastructure, but our systems are kind of designed to slow things down.
Yeah, that's the dilemma.
And our sources, they talk about this regulatory maze.
And this idea of liberalism's lawyer's problem.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
So after World War II, there was this huge expansion of government regulations.
To address things like
highway safety, environmental protection, all important stuff.
Right.
Our source quotes Saban, he says it's like taking apart a bicycle and then not being able to put it back together.
So like all these regulations, they create this incredible complexity.
Yeah, and Nicholas Bagley, he points out that political actors, especially on the right, they've learned to use these regulations to their advantage.
Like weaponizing bureaucracy.
Exactly. They use procedural hurdles, lawsuits, to slow things down.
That's interesting because it raises this question of like public trust in government.
Exactly. Bagley argues that for government to be legitimate, it has to be capable, informed, prompt, responsive, and fair.
So if it can't deliver on projects, even when they're popular,
it erodes trust.
And we've seen that happen, right?
Yeah, Pew Research Center data shows that public trust in government, it's been declining for decades.
Since like the 1960s.
And then you have this green dilemma that Rule and Salzman talk about.
Green dilemma.
It's the idea that both traditional infrastructure projects,
like roads and bridges,
and green infrastructure, like renewable energy projects,
they both face the same permitting nightmare
under existing environmental laws.
So it's not just about, like, bad intentions or anything.
No, it's the system itself.
It's making it harder to build the things we need.
Yeah, and they propose this idea of a green regulatory fast track.
Specifically for climate-critical projects.
To try to speed things up.
It seems like we need a more fundamental shift, though, right?
Political culture, yeah.
Like a change in mindset?
To prioritize speed and implementation.
Along with, accountability and preventing abuse.
It's a balancing act.
It is, and it makes me think about, like, how government itself operates, how it can be more effective.
It's interesting, right? Federal spending has gone up a lot since the 1960s. The federal civilian workforce, it's basically stayed the same.
So more money, but not more people.
And in the U.S., bureaucrat is like a dirty word.
But in other countries, like China and Singapore,
the civil service is highly respected.
It's a different mindset, and it makes me think about, like, all the stories we hear about government systems that are just, like, hopelessly outdated.
Like the Employment Development Department in California.
EDD, that was a mess during the pandemic.
It was. Their systems couldn't handle the surge in unemployment claims.
And it's not just EDD, right? Like California's court document management system.
They spent like $500 million trying to modernize that.
And the IRS, they've been trying to replace their core data system for decades.
Jennifer Polka, she has a really interesting take on this.
What does she say?
She says that public servants, they're often dedicated, but the systems they work with, they're just incredibly complex, and there's so many rules.
She uses the term subtraction.
Like, we need to actively remove unnecessary rules.
To make things more efficient.
It's a good point. And then you have this amazing contrast. The I-95 bridge collapse in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah, that was a crazy story.
A gasoline truck fire caused the bridge to collapse.
Like a major highway.
And got it repaired in 12 days.
12 days! That's insane for a project like that.
It was a huge effort, 2047 work. Governor Shapiro really pushed for it.
So what made that possible when so many other projects take years or even decades?
Well, there was a clear priority. They waived a bunch of bureaucratic hurdles.
And they just focused on getting it done.
It shows that government can move fast when it needs to.
So we've talked about the obstacles, the housing crisis, the need for clean energy, the regulatory maze, the challenges with government. But what about the driving force behind all of this? Innovation.
Right. And our sources, they kind of challenge this romanticized notion of
the lone genius having a eureka moment.
Yeah, they say that real progress towards abundance, it relies more on implementation, scaling up production, refining processes, deploying innovations at scale.
It's not as glamorous as the initial discovery.
But it's just as important, maybe even more so.
And they use the example of penicillin.
During World War II.
Okay.
So penicillin, it was discovered, but then the challenge was
mass producing it.
Exactly. And the War Production Board, the OSRD, they invested heavily in
production plants, standardized processes,
clinical trials, distribution networks.
It was a huge effort, but it saved millions of lives.
And it dramatically lowered the cost of penicillin.
This is a great example of, like, rights law in action, right?
Exactly. The idea that costs go down as production increases.
Because we learn by doing, we get more efficient.
And it's not just penicillin. We saw it with the Model T, with computer chips, Moore's Law.
So the U.S., we've been good at invention, but not always so good at implementation.
That's right, like with solar energy.
We were actually leading the way in solar research back in the 1970s.
But then we kind of stalled.
And countries like Germany, they took the lead.
It's a good illustration of what John Arnold said.
What was that?
America has the ability to invent. China has the ability to build. The first country that can do both consistently will be the dominant superpower.
It's a powerful statement, and it makes you wonder, like, what can we learn from other countries?
And how can we get better at that implementation piece?
Because that's what ultimately turns inventions into, like, real-world impact.
And our sources, they highlight Operation Warp Speed as a recent example of
successful implementation
led by the government.
So this was the rapid development and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah, and it was characterized by upfront subsidies, accelerated approvals,
and really proactive management of the supply chain.
They thought about everything.
And it worked. They got those vaccines out there incredibly fast.
And the cost relative to the benefits was really low.
But it's interesting, right? Because Operation Warp Speed, it's become this kind of
political orphan.
Yeah, like nobody really wants to take credit for it.
Even though it was a huge success.
And some people even try to use it to argue that government hinders innovation.
Which is crazy because it was a massive government effort.
That involved a lot of spending and direction.
It's a good example of how, narratives can get distorted.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to circle back to this idea of
abundance.
Because ultimately, that's what this whole conversation is about.
And our sources, they talk about this possibility of a new politics of abundance.
Even in the midst of, all the political divisions we see today.
Gary Gersel, he talks about these political orders.
Like the underlying beliefs and priorities that shaped politics for long periods.
And he suggests that right now, we're in this period where the old order is declining.
So it's a time when new ideas can take hold.
And this politics of abundance, it's contrasted with
a politics of scarcity.
Which is very seductive, especially when people are feeling anxious.
Like when there's a sense of there's not enough to go around.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems.
Like blaming immigrants for housing shortages, that kind of thing.
Yeah, scapegoating, us versus them thinking.
But our sources argue that to achieve abundance, we have to
make tough choices.
And maybe even disrupt some existing political coalitions.
Because the status quo isn't working.
We have to prioritize building and progress.
Over endless procedural hurdles.
And those entrenched interests that benefit from the way things are.
It's not going to be easy.
No, but the payoff could be huge.
A future where we have enough for everyone.
Enough homes, enough clean energy, enough medical breakthroughs.
Enough of everything we need to thrive.
It's a powerful vision, and our sources suggest that it's more aligned with, the American spirit.
Of innovation, of building a better future.
It's about renewing our institutions and focusing our collective genius on
solving the big problem.
And creating a world that works for everyone.
It's what they call a liberalism that builds.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the concept of abundance, the challenges and the possibilities, we want to leave you, our listener, with this question.
Yeah.
What single shift in mindset or in policy do you think would have the biggest impact?
On accelerating the arrival of this abundant future.
Think about the balance between regulation and progress.
The role of government in fostering innovation and implementation.
It's a complex issue, but your perspective matters.
It does.
So what do you think?